Welcome to the Podkey summary of Channel Orange. Today's catch-up is all about how Channel Orange became one of those albums that feels carefully built and slightly impossible at the same time. It was a creative reset for Frank Ocean, a record that traded obvious samples for live instrumentation and intricate sound design, while also holding together stories about desire, class, addiction, faith, and Southern California drift. And hovering around all of it was Ocean's 2012 open letter, which mattered culturally in a huge way, even as the album itself stayed bigger, stranger, and more layered than any single headline. One of the striking things about Channel Orange is how fast the core of it came together. Ocean wrote Channel Orange in roughly 2 weeks, then spent another 2 to 3 months developing the broader writing process with the producer Malay. He wasn't only pulling from straight autobiography either. He used real experiences and imagined characters. Almost like songwriting was a way to build alternate worlds, sometimes rosier than his own life. That matters because the album doesn't sound like somebody just keeping a diary. It sounds like somebody staging scenes, changing lighting, and deciding exactly where the camera goes. It was also a deliberate move away from Nostalgia Ultra, which leaned heavily on samples. This time, Ocean and Malay pushed toward live instrumentation, vintage studio gear, unusual song structures, and those very deliberate transitions that make the album feel continuous, even when it's hopping between moods. A lot of it was recorded at East West Studios, and that 1960s-era equipment helped support the whole blend of classic soul reference points and modern electronic production. The collaborator list was wide too. Pharrell Williams, John Mayer, Andre 3000, Earl Sweatshirt, Tyler, the Creator. It's a big cast, but the album still feels oddly intimate. Channel Orange is one of those records that really does resist a neat genre tag. People heard alternative R&B in it, sure, but also progressive soul, neo-soul, jazz funk, electro-funk, psychedelic textures, pop soul, and even bits of funk rock. What reviewers kept circling was that Ocean was helping push beat-driven R&B into something roomier and more adventurous, sometimes even a little avant-garde. You hear that in the details: muted percussion, shifting synths, live drums, vivid guitar lines, dub-like reverb, all arranged with a real sense of space. And then there's Ocean's voice, which keeps changing function. He moves through baritone, tenor, falsetto, conversational crooning, and this looser free-form flow depending on what the song needs. Even the interludes are doing a lot. You get PlayStation sounds, channel surfing, car doors, waves, tape decks, white noise, film dialogue, ambient fragments. Those little scraps can feel like memory, distraction, nostalgia, mental static, or just the clutter of modern life. They also help the record keep that loose mixtape continuity. The trade-off is that the production often puts sonic detail ahead of big, obvious hooks. For some critics, that patient complexity is exactly why the album lasts. For others, it could drift into formless grooves or feel a little overindulgent. Honestly, that tension is kind of part of its identity. The emotional world of Channel Orange is full of overlap. Love, sex, money, drugs, class, spirituality, they're not boxed off into separate themes. They keep colliding, and the deeper tension is between self-gratifying desire and some more selfless or moral conscience. That old soul music struggle between gospel and lust is all over this record. A lot of the songs work like compact character studies. On Super Rich Kids, you get wealthy young people stuck in ennui and fear after the 2008 financial crisis. It's luxury with a dead-eyed stare. Pilot Jones looks at addiction through the blur of emotional dependence and sexual attachment, where the characters can't really tell one from the other anymore. Crack Rock widens the lens and ties addiction to broken homes, gun violence, corruption, and government indifference. It's not treating drug use as some isolated personal failure. Then there's Pyramids, which is really the record's central pivot. It shifts from synth funk into slow jam, and sets up this comparison between Cleopatra's legendary fall and a modern stripper supporting a man's gaudy ambitions. Because it lands right in the middle of the album. it changes the temperature. The record starts moving from witty social observation into something heavier and more emotionally dense. And Southern California isn't just background scenery here. Critics rate it as more of a psychological state. Sunny, luxurious, numb, socially disconnected. A place where young adulthood can feel glamorous and emotionally airless at the same time, which is a very Los Angeles trick. Just before the album came out, Ocean published his July 4, 2012 open letter about an unrequited love for a man when he was 19, and he described it as his first love. That immediately reframed a few songs, especially Thinking About You, Bad Religion, and Forrest Gump, where the male-centered or homoerotic perspectives stood apart from the more heterosexual framing people had heard from him earlier. The letter was personal, but it was also clearly an artistic statement. Ocean said he wrote to keep himself busy and sane and to channel overwhelming emotions. At the same time, Malay emphasized that Ocean was a storyteller who could inhabit invented perspectives, so the album never collapses into simple autobiography. That ambiguity matters. These songs can be confession, metaphor, character study, or all three at once. The disclosure got support from Def Jam, other artists, and a lot of cultural commentators, and because it happened right before the release, it became one of the major frames around the album. But some critics pushed back on making it the whole story, because Channel Orange is too complex to shrink down to a single coming-out narrative. Bad Religion is probably the clearest example of how those layers work together. It stages a confession to a taxi driver and taps directly into that old soul tradition where religious devotion and forbidden desire are locked in conflict. The release strategy was its own small piece of music industry history. To avoid leaks, Ocean and Def Jam publicly announced a July 17 release date, then quietly put the album on iTunes a week early on July 10. That move was influenced by the kind of misleading rollout tactics Kanye West and Jay-Z had used around Watch the Throne, and Channel Orange ended up being an early major example of a surprise digital release used to control the launch. It also caused a dispute with Target, which chose not to stock the album. Ocean's manager suggested that might be related to Ocean coming out, while Target denied that and said the decision came down to assortment factors, including customer demand. Commercially, the album opened strong. It sold 131,000 copies in its first week, debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, and did that while being overwhelmingly digital, with only about 3,000 physical copies sold in that opening stretch. It later passed 600,000 sales in the US, which is a reminder that a record can feel like a cultural event and a format shift at the same time. Critically, it landed hard. A 92 on Metacritic, the most frequently top-ranked album of 2012, a Grammy for Best Urban Contemporary Album, and later placements on major decade and all-time lists, including Pitchfork's Top 10 of the 2010s and Rolling Stone's 2020 Greatest Albums ranking. That whole canonization arc makes sense, because Channel Orange didn't just arrive as a good album, it arrived as a new blueprint for what a mainstream R&B album could sound like, how it could move, and how much ambiguity it could hold without losing people. So if Channel Orange still feels fresh, that's probably because it was never aiming for a single lane in the first place. It's meticulously made, emotionally slippery, and somehow still easy to live with. Not a bad trick for an album built out of ghosts, grooves, and very specific California weather. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.